Starting out, Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord has a combat system that may feel rather awkward. So in today's video we're going over 10 easy combat tips and tricks you can use to win any battle with ease. In fact, after I started doing this I never lost a single round in a tournament, even with no armor on. Battle brothers and sisters, I need your help in Rise of Kingdoms. Today's video sponsored the ultimate mobile MMO strategy game inspired by history itself. It's free to play and has 11 historical civilizations to pick from, each with its own unique units and playstyle. I am British though, so I get longbows for Queen and country. Command your troops, movement in the heat of battle to flank your enemies. Each civilization even has its own architecture. Now there's a kingdom versus kingdom event where you can work with your kingdom members to battle against up to 7 kingdoms at once to unlock the King's Lands and conquer the Great Ziggurat. What are you waiting for? Get a cup of British tea and download Rise of Kingdoms right now from the link in the description. So starting out with combat tip number 1. A trick to easily defeat any opponent, especially in the arena, is to just carry on running around your opponent in a very tight circle while swinging your sword horizontally. I recommend running around their right side when they're holding a shield, because the enemy then will struggle to hit you because their sword arm is on the opposite side of them. As you can see, using this method is just so ridiculously stupid. Like, you can just run around them in a circle and they have a lot of trouble turning around 360 degrees, I guess as you would in real life, to actually respond to your onslaught. Just keep spamming the attack button and they will eventually die. You should be more careful if your opponent has a two-handed weapon, however. Getting up close and personal and just spamming the attack even with a short sword is sure to end their misery quickly. Next we have combat tip number 2, which is basically a follow-on more advanced technique. Essentially, when you swing your weapon, try to rotate your camera at the same time. For example, if I swing my weapon to the right, I'll turn my character and camera to the right too. This basically gives you a slightly bigger swing arc, so you'll very often catch the enemy with the tip of your sword or weapon. If the enemy has a shield, it also allows you to kind of swing your sword so you actually start hitting them in the back instead of their front defensive face all of the time. The reason for this is because when you rotate the camera, you're actually rotating the body of your character as well. This allows you to get in behind your enemy's shield. Used in combination with the first tip, with you constantly trying to run around the enemy, you just keep yeeting them in the back and they just can't do anything to defend themselves against you. You'll notice as well that your weapon also has a swinging arc. If you hit somebody near the end of that swing, you actually end up doing more damage to them. As you can see, when I'm using this technique, I'm not doing as much damage with a longer sword because I keep hitting the enemy at the start of my swing. But if I rotate my body in the right way, I then do tons of damage. This technique also works remarkably well if you have a spear equipped. You're going to want to turn your camera at the last moment, so you end up stabbing the enemy side on in their head ideally, or in the side of them. This lets you get around the opponent's shield and also allows you to poke them in the head with the end of your spear with little to no effort. Since you're not looking directly at the enemy when you make these kind of flailing attacks, the enemy usually won't actually end up blocking it. So unless you're playing multiplayer, this works really well. And also two-handed weapons as well. In particular, the axe, you're going to want to bear in mind exactly where the axe head is, because that's the part of the weapon you want to hit with. Next we have combat tip number 3. Now if you really are struggling with combat in Mount & Blade, a shield is going to be your best friend starting out. Being able to block most of the attacks that people throw at you is insanely helpful. Even though the shield will break eventually, you can still pick up someone else's, even in the heat of battle. While you do have your shield though, you can actually block just before an enemy attacks you, and you'll actually make them recoil slightly. This gives you a little bit of time for a counter attack. The lower your foe's combat skill, the longer it will take them to recover. It is also possible to parry them with a sword, however, this really isn't worth your time even trying to risk doing unless you're playing multiplayer or something like that. Combat tip number 4. If you headshot or hit a horse in the chest with a bow or a thrown weapon as it's running towards you, the forward momentum of the horse and the arrow colliding will result in it doing even more damage. This is due to the game's rather realistic physics system. Just like in real life, if I hold a spear and you run into it as fast as you can, obviously it's going to do more damage than me just poking you with it. Using this method, if you stand your ground, you can actually very easily, even with a bow or especially a thrown weapon and a spear, one hit kill a horse while it's running at you. Combat tip number 5. If you're using melee while mounted on horseback, long polearms are fantastic for picking off stragglers from the edge of an army. So I recommend grabbing yourself a polearm as soon as possible if you're trying to kill people from horseback. Hitting people while on your horse is all about timing. You kind of need to practice with how fast you're going and when to actually let go of the attack button so you can time hitting someone correctly. Obviously, the faster your speed, the more increased damage you're going to do with the weapon you're wielding, because physics. Just make sure that you never ride into the thick of the enemy army unless you're on a proper cavalry charger horse that's also armoured, because this can get your horse stuck and make it rear, and then that will result in you taking lots of damage and probably dying very quickly if you're on realistic difficulty. Combat tip number 6. You can actually also check while buying or equipping any weapon in the inventory screen or when you're buying something in the shop that you're planning on using on horseback. It will actually tell you the length of the item. So for example, especially the longer pole arms are obviously going to be a lot easier to actually hit your opponents with. Having a weapon that has a low thrust speed will also allow you to attack more often with it and potentially deal more damage, and it just makes it generally easier to time those cavalry charges against your enemy. You can also check if the polearm can be used with a shield or not, and obviously a shield and a polearm on horseback is going to protect you a little bit more from archers. Next up, we have combat tip number 7. It's always worth going for headshots when you're an archer. Most enemies will not have a very good helmet on, which means you're going to be doing ridiculous damage to them. But more importantly, just hitting an enemy in the head usually results in you doing 3 times more damage to them, compared to a body shot which will usually do between 20 to 50 damage depending on their armor. A headshot will usually do 70 to 120 damage. That's the exact same for thrown weapons as well as crossbows as well. Next we have combat tip number 8. When you're using a bow, you'll obviously find it to be a lot more accurate off your horse when you're on foot. However, if you are on horseback, you'll also need to account for your sideways momentum. So if you're riding to the right hand side, you'll need to shoot slightly to the left hand side of your target to actually hit them. And again, this is to account for the game's realistic physics system. If you're really struggling to hit things on horseback, that's probably why. Just kind of try and get used to that. You can also slow down your horse to reduce the size of your reticle and make it more accurate to hit people from horseback. And of course, swapping into first person and zooming in makes it a lot easier to aim at your targets. Combat tip number 9. When you are in the arena tournaments, you will always enter the arena with your equipped armor set. This gives you a huge advantage if you are well equipped. So one of the best ways to get money at the start of the game is to go ahead and win some tournaments and then grab yourself a decent armor set to give yourself an advantage. Also though, note that your companions will sometimes also enter the tournaments and battle with you with the armor that you gave them. So they might actually make it harder for you to win, which is quite funny. Then we have tip number 10. To make tons of money, take all this advice into the arena tournaments. Just make sure you save the game before entering, and then you can reload if you die. You can bet money on each round that you're in the tournament, which adds up into the price pool if you win. So you can easily make about 2,000 gold per tournament win, and also whatever the unique weapon is as a prize as well. It is very easy to do. And I also have tip number 11, just for banter. On the previous tip I mentioned that If you're on horseback and you attack an enemy, you're doing more damage just because you also have the speed of the horse, so naturally physics means you do more damage. In the same way, if you're running at an enemy with your sword or a spear, you're going to be doing a lot more damage to them. So one thing you can do to add a little bit of damage to your attacks is actually jump attack your enemies. This really does catch them off guard because you can sometimes hit above their shield and go for those lethal headshots. However, it is a lot more risky and it's really just for style points to actually do this. So I don't really recommend it, but oh my god, it's so fun and I do it quite often, to be honest. Guys, I've got loads of other guides linked in my playlist below on how to make lots of money, get the best armor in the game and so on. But if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, it really does help me out. And of course, if you want to see future Mount and Blade content on the channel, you can go ahead and subscribe and press that bell icon, and then YouTube will actually notify you when I have another video going out. And if you want to be a real hero and support the channel, you can also check out Rise of Kingdoms from the link below in the description. But guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all your support on these videos. I'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day, whatever you might be doing. Goodbye.